everybody, and welcome to this episode of Mind the Gap, making education work across the globe with me. And the surprise is already given away if you're watching this on YouTube, but I have two people here with me tonight. One of them is my recent co-host, Jon Hutchinson, and the other is returning from his 80 edu trips around the world, the Phileas Fogg of education. It is Tom Sherrington is back for good, as Gary Barlow would say. Good evening, Tom. Good evening, Jon.
Hello. Yeah, it's great to be here. Lovely to see both of you, actually. It's great.
Oh, it's so nice to see you both together, because hopefully today what we're going to do is to find out what we've all been up to during this period of travel and learning and reflection. So we're going to kind of reflect on what we've been doing on the podcast, but also what you two have been doing in your day jobs and on your travels, but both of your travels really, because you've both been very busy globetrotting, finding out what's going on in the world of education. So I'm going to start with you, Tom, and say welcome back. It's so lovely to see you, and tell us a little bit about where you've been and what you've been doing.
Well, first of all, just thank you to both of you for keeping Mind the Gap going. It was one of the things I noticed when I was traveling that it was just like I wasn't away. The episodes are coming out, amazing guests, and yeah, really brilliant. I really enjoyed particularly the interview with Zach Groschel, who I'm a big fan of, and Chris Such as well, who's written another incredible book about reading. So I mean that was just fantastic. But I won't go on too much about my holiday, but it was pretty amazing, I have to say, to feel like that you can just sort of go away and have an extended time where you can just do things for yourself and travel, seeing places, but being together and reading. And it was absolutely wonderful. And it was only really possible because my wife got a sabbatical from her school, which was great, yeah, so we're pretty excited about having done that. I learned how to do yoga. That was the legacy. And I've been going about 3 times a week ever since I got back. So I'm really into it now. I've become a real yoga bore, but I just find it so brilliant. It's so interesting in a kind of physical, but also a kind of mind-body way, which is something I've never experienced before. And I feel like at the age of 59 to only now have discovered yoga, my main message from this podcast will be do yoga because it's so good.
Pair share, cold call, downward dog. That's your
exactly. Yeah, absolutely. And also, yeah, it's just great to learn something new. But I did do some work. I met some wonderful people in Australia, which was really exciting. And since I've been back, I've been traveling and seeing schools mainly in overseas. But I've met up with some brilliant people in Amsterdam and in Malaysia, lots of different things. So it's been an exciting time. But anyway, it's great to be back. I'm looking forward to doing it.
So Tom, you obviously you were famously one of the most prolific bloggers, content creators, trainers, consultants in the country and internationally, and then you have this enforced/forced break from the being in the absolute center of kind of steeped in educational policy, education practice. And so I guess what everybody's wondering is, with that little bit of perspective, that sort of stepping back and sort of the world carrying on, did you come back with any great, perhaps during a crow pose or something, a great sort of epiphany of actually, I want to spend a lot more time doing this and a lot less time doing this, or we're focused on the wrong things, or we need to, were there any great kind of insights, moments of clarity that came from that kind of little bit of distance that you had?
I don't know, actually. I feel like, because I tell you what, I really switched off quite significantly. I deleted Twitter from my phone, and I kind of just stepped off it. And what I've noticed when I came back is just how mad it all is. I mean, it's one of the things I sort of, you just can quickly step away from it, like on like a moving train, and you get back on. It's like my main reflection coming back is it's pretty dynamic, our system, and I actually feel like the UK is always ahead of everybody else. I mean, I really feel that, in everything. Um, you know, it but because I don't know what it is. It's about the community we have is so dynamic and so connected and so interested in everything. And there are sort of debates that rage. But I really feel that's my main insight is that everyone talks about it all the time. Like you go to Australia, there is obviously its own community there. There's people I'm listening to this now. There is an emerging research informed community, but a lot of the blogs and things people are sharing are from the UK. Not all of them, obviously, but and the US is miles behind. The research ed event I went to in New York, they're so keen to get up to speed with all the huge extensive network in the UK, and that was so. I feel like I kind of feel pretty proud to be part of the community that we have, and it's so exciting, really. So I had a break from it, but that's my main insight that it's a kind of to celebrate it. It's exciting. It's a great place to be and a great community to be involved in.
Do you think that's partly to do with the fact that, and I'm just thinking about what Zach Groschel said when we spoke to him, the fact that in the UK we are so geographically close to each other all of the time, whereas some of the countries like Australia and the US are so vast. And Zach pointed out that what can be happening in one state or one area in America can function like its own little world, and there's not that kind of seeding of ideas across at that kind of pace of change. So I don't know whether some of it can be attributed to the fact that we're all squashed together here and that the rate of transfer can be quite quick, or whether it's to do with the infrastructure and the systems and the organisation of the education system. I mean, I don't know what you saw on your travels as well, John, because you've just come back from the US, haven't you?
Yeah, and so first of all, hugely lucky that I get to pop across to the US once a year, because one of the aspiring head teachers programs that we run on the foundation believes that it's important to be locally rooted, so they're place-based cohorts of aspiring head teachers, but internationally connected. And just last week we spent a week in New York, touring some charter schools and then also some public schools. And I think that it's very interesting, and it's difficult to say this is what the US is like, or even this is what charter schools are like, because just like in the UK and just like in England, it wouldn't make sense to say academies are like this. There's huge variation in how academies operate, the sorts of things that they value. If you take Michaela School and School 21 or XP for example, both kind of free schools, both academies, but operating in very different ways and putting emphasis on very different elements of education, and similar in the US and within charter schools and within New York. So I think that diversity really struck me, but also echoing what Tom said, I think, and we're massively grateful for people inviting us into our school. So I don't want to throw shade on anybody, but I think it is striking that the conversation around curriculum, especially, feels like it is significantly ahead in England. I think, and this has come through in the curriculum and assessment review as well, through all of the focus groups, through all of the roadshow events, and in the call for evidence. Regardless of what you read on Twitter, people are actually teachers, leaders, are pretty proud of the work they've done on curriculum over the last 10 years. There is now a common consensus that sequencing knowledge over time is a really sensible thing to do, and thinking carefully about what you teach the children is a really important thing to do. And I don't think that's happened everywhere. I think there is still a sense, especially in the US, because a lot of the states, they set standards. They say, that what we'll hold you to account for is whether the kids can find the main idea. So they're all talking about finding the main idea, and so nobody really cares. That's not nobody, but the content seems far less significant for people. And the second area is the science of learning. It's very difficult now, as our conversation with Zach revealed. It's very difficult in England to walk into a school and meet anybody who hasn't seen Tom and Ollie's diagram of the working memory model and long-term memory model, and understand cognitive load theory, and think about some of those sorts of key fundamental ideas around learning, as well as not fall for myths like kinesthetic learners. And generally speaking, that's not the case in the US. Even in very high performing schools, there isn't that same kind of core understanding of the fundamentals around sort of how people store, process, and retrieve information.
It's interesting. I feel like that what I've noticed sort of traveling around is how common it is for schools still. I mean, and to be honest, the UK schools, English schools, Scottish schools are on a similar journey. That there's some further ahead than others by far. In the region, in the area of professional development being a core structural element of school life, and therefore people having the forum to talk about cognitive load theory or curriculum design, and it's why I carry on and doing the work I'm doing and I get invited to go places, is because it's just a universal challenge. And it's interesting if you sort of started again now, you're thinking let's build schools again. I mean, apart from various other elements that you might go in there, you would say, well, teachers obviously need to carry on learning and work together on that and have systems for that. And I'm endlessly fascinated by how complicated people have made it to change that. And then and sometimes I'm just going in and saying, when do you meet next? And they hardly ever do. And this idea that teachers are kind of like solo operators that go off into their classrooms to do stuff and don't have to think and discuss that endlessly. It's weird to me. And then the content of that obviously is interesting. And there's still a strong dominance of kind of I would call social and emotional kind of factors around learning, and people still needing to be persuaded that learning itself through an application of cognitive science and so on is the way to support students socially and emotionally, rather than sometimes being against it. And I've had so many chats about cold calling. It's like, God, like it's the dark force of cold calling. You think it's just teachers are pained by this. They hate the idea of being the person who makes a child upset. But you just think you've got to break through that, got to get over your concerns and make it feel like an inclusive thing. I don't know. Those conversations are absolutely universal. Every international school, every school I've been to in Australia, every place I've been to the US, this need to persuade teachers that it's okay to like cross that threshold and invite kids to participate fully. This is an amazing force.
So what are the big sort of persistent problems or persistent pictures that teachers are butting up against, that you're seeing wherever you go? You think, there's that thing again, there's that thing again.
Oh, well, if you're asking me, I mean, seriously, this is where I feel like, I mean, I have a set of things that I do when I train, I feel like I could use it in nearly any school because it's always relevant, and that's an amazing thing to say. This sounds a bit arrogant, but it's true. And it's things like something as basic as how do you do think, pair, share, so that every child speaks and every child listens, and you sample as many answers as possible, but you definitely make sure every single child is involved. I mean, how do you do that? And the truth is that most teachers find that like interesting because they haven't thought about it in that much deep depth before, and that's what they tell me. And it's that precision around that you think like there are ways of doing this stuff that make it work for every child, but look, this is how it is. And it's amazing to me how something as basic as that is still like uh, worth discussing with experienced professionals, that we really have to get. And then how do you build a pair share into a more extended class discussion, which still in all of that. And so what my whole bit in my training, we use this fantastic material, which I gleaned from a school I visited last year, where we look at paint graffiti. And it's art versus vandalism. So you have like a Banksy, which is in Venice, and a graffiti on a train. And the discussion was, is it art or vandalism? And so it's interesting material. The teachers often want to talk about that more than they do about the techniques, but as they know, it's just the material. And we said, how do we get everyone to think about this stuff? We have to give them language. You can't just say, oh, I think it's vandalism, I think it's art. You have to have language to describe aspects. Is it to do with rights, consent, the aesthetic value, the meaning, all these sorts of an artistic genre. So you talk about the vocabulary, the tools to think with, then the structure of the talk and who talks first and how you share, and then how you practice saying certain phrases and saying things like, well, on one hand, I think it's art, but on the other hand, it could be vandalism. So you balance it. All that can be structured, and people are going, wow, there's a lot in this, isn't there? You could just say, have a chat on your table. Do you think it's art or vandalism? And it'd be absolute rubbish. Or you can make it brilliant. And I just, for me, I'm just totally nerdy about this now. It's the precision, the detail in this stuff, which I find teachers find interesting, rather than saying, here's a new technique you've never heard of before, or let's talk very generally about metacognition or something. It's locating it in the room, in the class, in something meaty, you know. And I find that brilliant that you can discuss this with teachers everywhere. They're all really into it because it resonates with their experience that this isn't as easy to do as it seems. Anyway, I mean, I could go on about that, but I've been having the best time doing that stuff in the last couple of months.
So you've been kind of focusing on that level of detail at classroom level when teachers are having those multiple interactions with children per day. And John, you've kind of been a couple of steps out of that, working with the next generation of leaders who are going to be leading on things like that. So I just kind of wanted to ask you a little bit about, whilst Tom's busy doing the precision and the detail, what are our next generation of leaders doing in the programs that you're working on? Because I know that you're addressing their development with that kind of precision in the program that you're working with.
Yeah, I feel like the luckiest person in the world because I just get to hang out with these kind of aspiring head teachers. They are and it's a different way of working for me because I've previously, you know, been a teacher and a senior leader and then done some kind of like training with schools, but it's not like that. There's a fundamental belief that we have, which is in the east of England, that the talent is there, the drive is there, the motivation is there. There are absolutely fantastic practitioners and leaders working across the region who are hungry to provide excellent education for kids. And the work that our foundation does in the east of England, but also in the southwest, the West Country, Yorkshire, and now Greater Manchester, launching in September, is to give those leaders time and space together to think about the sorts of schools that they want to lead and to think about the opportunities that are available through collective action, through by building very deep relationships over the course of a year, kind of rejecting this hero head teacher mindset of education's a game, P8 is a kind of a baseball score, and we just want to get the highest one. And if that means that the school down the road gets a bit of a lower one, well, that's the game. Like, sucks to be you. You should have done what we've done. Instead, sort of seeing this kind of collective responsibility of we want all children in the east of England to be able to flourish, which means enjoying sort of academic excellence in terms of the grades that they receive, and that we can. This is a complex problem to solve, but a big part of that is having brilliant schools across the region, so that kids can't help but go to a brilliant school led by people who are sort of working collaboratively together. And definitely a distinct, but we talk about stimulus, not solutions. So we don't sort of say to them, you know, you should read this book and do this, or you should run your school in this particular way. What we do is we put lots of head teachers who are walking the walk and talking the talk, and put those in front of them, give them the opportunity to see those schools, and then have conversations with the head teachers of what decisions have you made, why have you made those decisions, how have you sort of like seen that through, how are you evaluating it, and sort of dig into the kind of the nuts and the bolts of what's going on underneath, and give them multiple examples of that, so they have these kind of concrete mental models of what educational excellence looks like and how it's been arrived at, and then they make sense of that together as a group, have time to unpack that, make sense of it together, and think about how they can start to take that back to their schools, but also how they can build that into their vision for the school that they want to lead. And just finally, the absolute sort of North Star that we talk about all the time is pupils experiencing disadvantaged pupils, socioeconomically disadvantaged pupils who we know just underperform massively nationally. And it's not true in all schools. So it's not kind of an inevitability. If one school can have no disadvantage gap, if one school can have a progress 8 of disadvantage and non-disadvantage that's identical, then in theory every school can do that. And so we talk about how do you make decisions as school leaders with those kids in mind, and we think it benefits those kids and it harms nobody. To Tom's point of sort of high participation, if you have low participation in classrooms, if you walk into a classroom and you think, okay, about 60% are sort of listening to this teacher and sort of doing the work, and about 40% aren't, you can bet your bottom dollar that most of the disadvantaged kids are in that 40%. That's true in most classrooms across the country, which is why we have this disadvantage gap. So thinking about, for example, how do we make sure that every teacher has 100% or as close to 100% as participation as possible during lessons is a disadvantage gap buster.
Wow.
It's like a zoom in, zoom out.
Yeah.
It's like,
I love that, you know, it's because what you're describing there is sort of, it's one of my favorite things. In fact, this week I'm doing a thing tomorrow and again the day after of different groups of schools, and they come together like one's maths is like several primary schools in Northamptonshire tomorrow, and then a group of schools in Reading on the day after. And they come together because they've got they're either formally in a group or they're part of a regional group, and they discuss the same issues. So it's all about how do we do, you know, teaching, learning, CPD or techniques, and why is it valuable to them all to do the same? Because then they have the same language for the problems they have in common, which they can continue into the future. And they all do. I mean, all schools have the same exact issues around how children learn is the same. And how do we find time for CPD, and how do we find time for forms of coaching which work in our context, all that kind of stuff. And it's so, I love that you create a framework for solving the problem, which is universal, so that everyone can then discuss it together rather than thinking their problems are unique or unsolvable. I find that massively powerful. In fact, one of the things that's happened in my work recently is the number of big organizations that want to do our thing because they recognize that power of the collective. And you know, some big groups of schools, Catholic school systems in Australia, for example, and it gives people the sense of solidarity, like we're not alone. Especially some primary schools are so isolated sometimes to be part of a network, which cool. This is such a relief. Like we all, when they hear the voices around the room, we all have to solve these. But sounds like what you're doing is similar, but it's that kind of. But then what I love is being the micro guy coming in and saying, and when it comes down to it, what you're drilling down to are these details in the room, and actually, it's having to frame all of it, isn't it? So that the system supports the focus on the detail. But this is one of the things I think is universal, is in lots of schools, is that it's still not. We haven't quite got our head around this idea that it's totally normal to need people to observe us teach in order for us to really maximize our improvement. And I find that agenda is really interesting, like culture shift and the reasons why is it that when you enter the profession as a teacher, right from early on, you develop this mindset that it's a bit odd to be observed and a bit awkward, and it just so shouldn't be like that. And it's one of the axes of difference I find really interesting is schools where it's totally normal and then like a nothing, like to schools where people coming in is an enormous thing. And it's like why the leadership, the culture difference in those schools is so interesting.
It fascinates me about the observation thing because I don't know any other sort of workplace where people don't see you at work. As in, if you work in the medical profession, you'll be surrounded by your contemporaries as you carry out your daily tasks, and you'll actively invite people to watch you and learn with you and discuss and reflect and refine. And if you're working in creative industries, if you're working, and I'm just thinking about industries that my friends and family work in, they work in teams and they work collaboratively and they know what everybody else is doing. It's a very unique setup in education that we kind of notionally get this certificate, walk into our classroom, close the door. Now you're not allowed to see me anymore. You know, and not only that, but I'm going to feel very uncomfortable if you want to come and see me. And I think that the leadership work that we do really needs to focus on developing that culture where kind of collective endeavor and collaborative working is championed, because if we do metaphorically close the door and have these kind of high stakes observations, then nobody's going to be able to talk about and react to and look at that kind of precision in that detail that you're talking about, Tom, and that Jon's doing. So I do find it an odd quirk of education that we don't invite people in and go, how am I doing? What do you reckon? What are you doing? Shall we have a look at what each other's doing and then see what we can pull out of that, what we can build on? It's a very, very odd quirk. And I don't know whether I'm just strange, because I always invited everybody in. It was like, open door, come in, have a chat.
Yeah, the trouble is, of course, that we have a history over the last 30 years where we have had people coming into our classrooms, and it's been incredibly punitive, and that's why it's very high stakes. That's why people don't necessarily immediately, if you come in and say, well, look, we're going to do instructional coaching, it's going to be great, somebody's going to come in and watch you and then give you some feedback. You know, why aren't you so grateful for this? Feedback's a gift. And they say, well, because the last 10 times that somebody came in and my job was on the line, and they we'd have a conversation where they'd sort of talk about whether or not I was going to get my pay rise this year based on whether or not I did the technique that they talked about at the start of the year that they like. So I think that you're absolutely right that is the kind of rocket fuel, and certainly lots of the leaders that we work with, the kind of common barrier is, well, look, we have teachers who don't seem to have the same appetite and hunger to improve than we see in, you know, we go and visit this school and we see wonderful practice, but all these teachers are constantly sort of like talking about, how do I get a little bit better, tiny bit better in this way, tiny bit better in that way, inviting in their assistant head, inviting in their head of department, listening carefully. And they say, well, we don't have that. We don't have teachers like that. We have teachers who have had that kind of experience. They've got that kind of baggage with them, and we can't just wave a magic wand overnight and just for the whole of the profession to suddenly say, actually, no, we are going to really enjoy being observed now, if their entire professional history has been that being tied to support plans and capability, performance management and pay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes me so sad that I still work with schools and they are still working with checklists and rubrics, and this, every single lesson has got to have this big long list of things, and I'm thinking, what are you doing? This is not how it works. This is
A friend of mine who's now I used to work with him years ago, and we actually when I make music, I make it with him. He sings and I play, and but he's an amazing English teacher. Was an assistant head, and then for a long time he was out of teaching for various family reasons, and then he went back into it as a mature person, as a regular English teacher. And you know, and he's in a scenario where, I mean, literally got pulled up by senior leaders because they walked past his classroom. And we looked in the window, and he was on the wrong slide. And you just think, you know, he said that when he had a meeting with him, he just said, you know, what do you think you're doing? You know, like, what's happened to you? Why are you, why are you doing this? Like, what's happened to the world of education where you literally are calling me in for a meeting because I added a couple of extra slides to help the students scaffold from the core resources. And he's literally chastised for that. I mean, it's unbelievable that is a kind of experience someone could literally have as probably one of the best English teachers I've ever known. And rather than just saying, do you know what, get on with do what you want to do because you're awesome, you know, and making him feel that way just made him feel like a lot of other people have been made to feel like. It's just ludicrous. Now, I want to interject here because I feel like without this planning this is like a segue into the blog phenomenon of recent times, which is Emma Turner's hit blog. Which has like something like 30,000 hits in about 4 days. Analog teaching. Now, what is this? What have you? Tell people who haven't read it what you're saying.
Okay.
Brilliant.
So it was born out of about the last couple of years of watching lots and lots of lessons everywhere. And then it kind of hit boiling point when I was in a lesson just before half term, and it was a Easter holiday, sorry. And it was a year 2 lesson, and they were teaching how to read an analog clock with a digital projection. And I just thought, it felt like there's a glitch in the matrix here. We're talking about something that physically moves as an analog clock, but we've created a digital version of it that we're going to tap through all these pre-prepared slides rather than actually having an actual physical clock. And then that chimed with some work that I'd been doing with a head teacher who was talking to me about a science lesson in his year 1 class where they were doing properties of materials, and the teacher had got these pre-prepared resources, a picture of some paper, a picture of some wood, and a picture of some plastic, and was trying to teach children in year 1 about properties of materials with digital projections of the materials, and trying to get children to use the language of flexibility or smoothness or and texture. And I was just like, what is going on? You know, why have we forgotten that teaching is a rich, physical, interactive experience? And I don't mean interactive whiteboard. I mean the interplay between teachers actually physically scribing things on the board, ensuring that children see the movement of the hand in space, correct letter formation, that they see the live modeling of expert thinking made visible, that we've kind of defaulted a lot of the time to click, click, click all the way through this kind of clicky curriculum. And there's nothing more inert and unable to be annotated than a PowerPoint. And I just think when we're trying to be doing responsive adaptive teaching, we kind of need to see the digital world as a bolt-on and a help to what I would call analog teaching, which is the teacher in real time actually scribing the content. And I talk in the blog about how my ideal setup is an interactive whiteboard with 2 actual whiteboards either side to scribe, so that we've not got the transient information effect where we click through and it all disappears because it's there, it's you know, it's still permanent on the whiteboards. And I keep going into classrooms where that's not happening, where I just see lots and lots of things clicked through on a usually too small TV screen that children can't actually see from the back, and the teacher doesn't write anything. They just click all the way through, and I'm thinking, what has happened? And that the beauty and the dynamism and the kind of conceptual prototyping that you can do with analog teaching isn't happening for one reason or another. So it was my championing really of I would say good old fashioned, but I don't think there's anything old fashioned about being a really good modeler of a process or a thought or a concept. But it was this moving away from the default of the digital and championing this kind of real life analog teaching. And that's my blog in a nutshell.
Wow, that's amazing. What's your take on it, John? What's your experience? Are you a kind of digital? Does that resonate with you?
I loved it, and Emma's writing always challenges me, because I'll be honest, when I first read that, like my defense mechanisms went up because I've written a booklet based curriculum, and I think, oh no, this is going to be an attack on kind of rigid curricula, and I feel defensive about that, because I do, as we've spoken about before, as I do see kind of the, oh gosh, that's not what we intended when in the classroom of a kind of a clicky curriculum, as Emma was describing. I think that there's a couple of things in there. The one that I'll pick out first of all, though, which I think is so important that you've drawn attention to, Emma, is I mean, lucky enough to be in lots of classrooms and lots of schools, I so seldom see modeling. I see loads of quizzing. I see loads of kind of whole class core responses. I see loads of sort of like partner talk. I see loads of kind of like front the writing on mini whiteboards or sort of in boxes, and I think all of these are really high impact strategies and really helpful. But I'll sometimes walk around the school for 2 hours and sort of like say to, as we're walking around, say, do you know, haven't actually seen any teaching here. I've seen lots of really good sort of like management of content, and I suppose so it is kind of teaching, so getting kids to think about the content, but I haven't seen anybody say, as Emma said, here's a problem, here's how I would work through this, here's how I would solve this problem, or we're writing a setting description and we're going to think about the sorts of adjectives that we use in the setting description. So here's the picture, and here's how I sort of like start that. And it's slightly different in primary and secondary, especially in writing lessons in primary. You do tend to see more modeled writing and shared writing. But I don't see as much modeling as Emma says. You know, there's good grounding in a lot of that cognitive science stuff around that being a really effective way to manage cognitive load, because the information is appearing sort of just in time, and they're processing it sort of and seeing the metacognitive sort of like thinking out loud strategies. And it's risky for teachers, isn't it? It's really hard. It's much harder than sort of just clicking and the model exemplar being there and saying, right, let's kind of read this together, and then doing control the game to pick the kids to read it out. And so there is a risk there. And I know that this isn't what Emma's advocating, but there's also this polarity of, you know, are we saying every teacher has a script and a slide deck where they have to be on slide 7 at 11:04, otherwise they'll get a nasty email from their head teacher, or it's anything goes and every teacher's making up everything on the spot?
I think there's such a middle ground. I mean, one of the, I mean, I've mentioned this on this podcast before, but in Haringey, where I live and do some work, they use they work with me and my work, but also Christine Cancel and the Opening Worlds curriculum, and they have these resources which are fantastic, slide decks, booklets, and stuff. And you know, a lot of the time, because it's a process, a journey, the teacher is not yet the expert in that area because it's quite detailed, and they're learning it by doing it. You see them working through the resources with the students, and they are a bit tied to the slides and the materials because they're not yet knowledgeable enough, because they teach it 2 or 3 times and they'll be more independent of the resources, but that takes time. And you recognize that, you think, you want to criticize that, you're going to say that's part of the process, right? That you've got to, the resources in a way are the spine of the thing, and it's really well mapped out, so the children are getting a good deal even though the teacher's still learning it. And I think that's fine. It's when that becomes like absolutely embedded into everything that you just think the kids' experience, the diet they have. And it's in science, like one of the things I feel is the instinct teachers have around this, and it is to trust that it's okay. I mean, I remember doing a training day with some NQTs, and they literally said to me, I was encouraging talk and some like hands-on stuff, and they were saying, but what if SLT came in? I was like, well, what do you mean? They said, yeah, but what if there was nothing in their books? And you just think, oh man, it's so sad to hear that. Like, I was talking about science at Key Stage 2, and how, like, when you do magnetism, don't worry about like any of the rules or getting it in your book. Just get them to feel magnetism. Like, this magnet repels. Can you feel repulsion? And just feel the force. Like, it's invisible and it's amazing. This object repels this one. Feel it pushing away. Isn't that amazing? It's an amazing thing that it even happens. It's like, let's get the joy, that feeling, the touching. And so you have to have enough of them to share around and all of that. And that is, to me, the most important thing to take away from that lesson, is to have experienced magnetism as a phenomenon. And if your book's empty, who cares? It's like, but I think you need to get that confidence from leaders and from people to value that type of approach, as well as it coming from the teacher.
It's such an interconnected thing about first of all, the modeling bit, John, is that's something I think that has died a death in recent years. And I think partly, I just think back to when I was teaching English years and years ago, we had to do guided writing. So we were very well versed in how to do guided writing, and that drifted across the curriculum, and modeling became much more overt, much more obvious, much more embedded in practice. And I think that when teachers were potentially designing less with digital resources, then the modeling was front and center because you kind of only had yourself to do it. So you became more skilled in it because you hadn't got the behind you this amazing screen to do it. And I've said a lot on social media this week about my lovely green rollerboard that I used that I first started teaching with. But the only way to show children how things worked was to model it yourself, was to show it, was to talk through. But when you are modeling, it's pulling in all of this understanding about how we learn by things like orienting children's attention. If you're not physically orienting their attention around the diagrams that you have projected, how are they actually going to know this is the important bit that I need to look at? This is the most important. When you're standing there actually underlining it, going, right, this is the bit I want you to look at. This was why I did this. Watch how that links to that. If you're not doing that, you're not making expert thinking visible. You are just a delivery mechanism for some content. The actual explaining of how this works, why I've made this decision, why the 7 doesn't go there, why the 3 does go there, or why this magnet behaves in the way that it does if it's this way round or if it's that way round. That's a really important part, that modeling. And I think that the use of digital technologies as a presentation tool has actually de-skilled a lot of teachers in terms of their ability or experience of modeling because they haven't had to do it. The practical aspect, Tom, of actually physical hands-on experience of the curriculum, I could talk all day long about that, because if children don't have those kind of, that, if we think about the extended mind in action, that novel movement effect, they don't feel magnetism, they can't physically feel the texture of that wood or the texture of the paper or the flexibility of that particular sheet of plastic, how on earth can they understand it? And all you get then is retrieval practice with children parroting things back, going, the paper was flexible. They don't know what flexible means. They've just learned something. So you have to have a physical analog curriculum to get children to understand the concepts we're trying to teach them. If you're teaching children just stuff for them to remember without genuinely understanding what it tastes like, feels like, smells like, emotionally, what effect it has on them, we're not teaching them anything. So you have to be analog to make all of those techniques meaningful. So the kind of the practical work underpins genuine understanding. It's not oh, I shouldn't be doing it. It's I should be doing it, and then doing the writing, and then doing the retrieval practice.
That and then, because it's important, isn't it? Because I sort of feel like what you were describing reminded me of, and primary teachers will know it well, the lemon sherbet lesson, which every primary teacher, if you've taught in the last sort of 30 years, you've done the lemon sherbet lesson of for international listeners or those not in primary, you put a lemon sherbet in front of the kids and they have to look really closely at the lemon sherbet, and they have to smell the lemon sherbet, and then they have to feel the lemon sherbet, and they have to pop the lemon sherbet in their mouth, and then they do some writing about it. And like, when I first did that, I was reading through all of the kids writing at the end of it and thought, oh, the kids who could already write have done a really good job on this, and those that couldn't write very well have not done a very good job on this. Similar to, I remember being told to get all of my year 3 kids who were sort of the lowest attaining kids to do the risky curriculum, where they went out and did sort of water fights and then came back in and wrote about it, and lo and behold, the writing was just as bad as it was before. And I think that the kind of the clicky curriculum was almost a response to that you can give them all of the experiences that you like. If they don't have this kind of technical knowledge of how to put a sentence together, then no matter how rich and vivid the kind of stimulus experience, no matter how great the drama activity of acting out the story beforehand, they're still not going to be able to write it at the end of it. And now I think you're absolutely right to question, which I definitely see and hear a lot now from teachers and leaders, of the kind of the pendulum swinging too far the other way, and that it feeling like there is a diet for kids which is a lot of in silence, all eyes on the board. Here's the thing, you do the thing in silence. Here's the thing, a 8-second think, pair, share, and then write down your response.
I know it's bad.
And I think that this potentially does link to some of the attendance stuff that we're seeing, because the kids go home and say to the parents, I didn't get to chat to any of my friends. I didn't get to sort of like do any of these sorts of activities that the parents often sort of rightfully expect. And they think, well, if your teacher's just clicking through a presentation and you're doing tasks, then you could do that at home with a textbook probably in half of the time. So what's the point in going to school?
It's so interesting how many things there are to sort of balance and get, and in terms of like people's sort of positions on this, and sometimes it's the tribalism is kind of gets in the way. One of the best lessons, I mean, I celebrate this. I'll never forget this lesson. It was a year 3 shared right lesson. I think they were using the kind of Pi Corbett talk for writing. Is that his thing? But it was just absolutely electric. I mean, the teacher had everyone like, I was so into it, the story, and it was all on board. They're all on the carpet, and then they were like the writing was emerging. They had sideboards with the words and ideas and structures that they'd used before. It's all analog. It's all handwritten, and there's this amazing mechanism of exploring sentences and reading again. So we all say that one, and then they say, "Well, what do you think? Is that right?" No, because it's a bit more. He was a bit more surprised. That's how he's like. That was shock. This is a bit more. It's more subtle. So, what would be better if let's do this instead, and then changing and editing. And what I thought was just as brilliant, because I wasn't sure about this. I've only seen a few of these lessons. Back to your tables, the kids all around me, they were doing their own, and it was like they'd learned. It wasn't like they were copying the one they'd done. They really weren't. They inspired them to be like, yeah, they were modeling. You could see them doing it. They were going through the same thought process on their own that they just done together. It was so captivating. But the teacher, what I loved was she got them all to read each bit and then read each bit all the way from the start. And so by the time they got to the end, they knew it. They almost sing-songing it. They were practicing saying every structure again and again. So they were enjoying their own story that they created. They were loving it. They were loving it. It was so great. I thought, wow, this is how you teach. And that to me is like when you see a great teacher and a great program, actually, you think it's the two together. Like she hasn't invented this process. It's a process which has been they've done a lot of CPD on, but it works so brilliantly. And I thought this is how teaching should feel like: secure curriculum content, well rehearsed, experienced teacher.
I think modeling is the bridge between great curriculum content and what we know about how we learn. That's the bit. So you could got all your strategies about actually getting stuff to stick and getting children to remember things. You've got your brilliantly planned subject content that's sequenced beautifully, that's rich and diverse and what have you. Those two aren't going to come together unless you bridge that with expert modeling. And so a lot of my work that I do with schools is around, yes, sorting your curriculum out, yes, understanding how we learn, but actually then the magic happens in the modeling, is how you as a teacher explain how this content comes to life and is organized so that the children could then store it because they've had that made visible through the expert in the middle. So I do think that modeling is the magic, and modeling essentially is analog.
You know what I find fun people hard, it's like you go around is that people who find modeling hard often find it hard to do at the same time as I've spoken to teachers recently about how talking whilst they're doing is hard for them, and or doing it modeling whilst also managing behavior is hard, and so you kind of pull back from it because it's difficult, so you end up doing something which is even in their own mind wasn't what they wanted, but they felt it's when you're really doing it, you're doing a lot of pausing and looking and checking, and it's so many skills wrapped into it. Anyway, I want before we finish, I want to just ask you a couple of things about the podcast, because we are we're just talking about what we've been thinking about recently, and it's so interesting. Is all the guests you had. I mean, we could go through run down the list, but just who are the people that if you were to say to me like you must listen to this podcast, then I haven't listened to them all. Which one would you be saying? I don't know, John. Do you want to kick off? Who would be your top tip?
It's obviously almost an impossible question because we're hugely grateful to, and I took away tons from each of them. But the one that stayed with me has been the conversation that we had with Leora Cruddas, the CEO of the CST, and the reason for that was that she articulated this this kind of what feels like quite a radical idea, but shouldn't be, which is we are the people that we've been waiting for. All of these things that we're talking about, we don't need a new law or a new policy or a government decision. We have the freedom to kind of do it now. Leaders have the freedom to do this now. We too often wait for permission, too often do the wrong thing. We know that's the wrong thing in kind of potentially in response to some perceived kind of like disincentive, but sometimes it's kind of us collectively doing a thing that we don't believe in that then gives it its power, and that we can write a different story, that we can behave in different ways, and that it's up for the profession to kind of take control from that, and that's leaders in every school and teachers in every school, and also sort of talking up the profession. To go back to the start of the conversation when Tom, you said, I've come back from my travels around the world and feeling pretty proud about our school system in England, and the conversations that school leaders and teachers and support staff are kind of having. We should feel proud. We actually beat ourselves up a little bit, but we're really quite a lot further ahead than even some countries that we send sort of ministers out to go and look at to think what we can learn from. And so Leora, I think, articulated that so brilliantly, and so that's kind of stuck with it. It's given me a bit of a sense of sort of trying to take up that mantle of talking up our profession, talking about all the stuff that we get right, that happens in schools day in, day out, that's brilliant across the country, and then also kind of working with leaders as I do now to be a little bit bolder, to kind of do the thing that they think is right, and be able to articulate why they're doing that, and be able to articulate they're not going to do the thing that everybody says that you should, but you know it's a bad idea.
Right, I'm definitely going to listen to that then. That sounds fantastic. I love it. How about you, Emma? What's your?
Oh, just mentally scrolling through. It's like asking me to pick who's my favorite child.
And it is the best. Just so it's one of the ones. One of them.
Okay, so Syed Atcher, if you haven't listened to his, just the most wonderful, uplifting story of his life and his impact. But the one that personally really resonated with me was Emma Shepherd talking about the motherhood penalty and the loss to education of so many parents leaving the workforce because of barriers linked to childcare and pay progression and promotion. And I think the work that the MTPT project is doing to support and keep talent in the profession, if we haven't got people to teach the children, it's going to be a pretty dire situation. So I think the kind of, I won't say quiet work because they're not quiet about the work that they do, but often they're not front and center in big conversations. But I think the work that Emma and her colleagues are doing with the MTPT project was so fascinating to listen to, and I'm so pleased that she and her colleagues are getting a seat at the table to really put this front and center, to make sure that we've got people who can stay in the profession and who are enabled to contribute, regardless of what their kind of setup is at home. And I loved talking to her. It was just a real, very niche, but actually underpins a lot of what's going on in the recruitment and retention space at the minute. So I loved that.
Yeah, that's fantastic. They're two contrasting issues, but it's sort of all about the people we have in the system leading. The one I'd recommend for me is Neil Gilbride, Dr. Neil Gilbride, the one about with John talking about self-efficacy, and it's a new in action book. So obviously I've got a bit of skin in the game there, having been the editor of that. But I just think it's one of those ideas. Like, there's a lot of books on my shelf behind me about retrieval practice and things which are kind of well understood and documented and repeatedly. But self-efficacy is kind of it's like when you read about it, you think, oh my God, that's such a brilliant set of ideas. And it's if that informs your teaching, that thing of I need students to develop the capacity to think and do and plan and feel in control and feel owners of their own learning process, which echoes what Dean and William and various other people. But I think for me, it's a bit of a revelation. Like, why is it that I've never heard of this really before? Bandura, self-efficacy. So when someone shines a light on it, it makes you go, wow, okay, that's a really interesting take on something I've been doing all this time, but I've not really been explicit about it. And if I was more explicit about it, and I really intentional about developing self-efficacy, I would have done it better. And I think it's really, I'd say to say something is important sounds a bit grandiose, but I do think it is. I think it's an important idea that more of the teachers should know about. So yeah, so listen to that and definitely get hold of Neil's book. It's absolutely brilliant.
Oh, the irony of me talking about Emma Shepherd and maternity and paternity, and I missed that episode because I had a childcare crisis. Life imitating art. But before we finish though, Tom, I just want to kind of sound a little bit of a fanfare. Not only that you're home safe from your travels, but just the casual drop earlier on before we were on air, about 11 million views of your blog now.
I know, it's mad, isn't it? People kept reading it. I thought that when I stopped promoting it for several months, it would sort of die, but it never did. And when I look at all the stats, I realised that, you know, there's a blog I wrote about Dylan Williams' formative assessment strategies, which gets about 600 or 700 hits, or some days, but every week it's 3,000 or something. It's like it's gone up and up because it's like on a reading list somewhere. But it's, yeah, I'm pretty chuffed about it. People I have got, since I've been back, I've written a few, got into trouble over a couple of them, but I feel slightly less. I feel like slightly unchained, you know. I can just say what I think, and maybe I should be a bit more careful upsetting people. But
well, I think huge congratulations for 11 million. I'm guessing that's more than the population of some of the countries you visited on your travels.
And the other thing I wanted to say to people is that one of the great things that I've been involved with since I've been back is writing the 5th walkthroughs book, the coaching walkthroughs with Matt Stone and Oliver Caviglioli, and it's so brilliant that working with them, because they, you know, you write things together, and Matt and I do the writing, and then we fin it on a spreadsheet, and then tell Oliver we've done it, and then he'll, about a day later, he sends you the graphics, and he's sort of done. I mean, he must have done like 400 images or something for this book. It's the pink one. What were you? I'm a bit colorblind myself, so I don't really know if it's pink or mauve or purple.
I was wondering whether it was pink or magenta or wine.
That will come out soon. But that was interesting, like codifying, thinking about how you do different things in coaching. So that's been fun to do. But it's nice to be back. And I think we probably have to stop now, but
I know I genuinely feel like I'm talking like that. I just wanted to say that thank you to John for everything that we've done with the episodes, and also very quietly in the background to Luke for producing all of this continually, and herding us all into the right place at the right time and being utterly unflappable constantly. So thank you to Luke. Thank you so much to John. It's been an absolute pleasure to record the episodes with you. I hope you'll still come back.
Whenever I've got something to plug, I'm going to be in your DMs. I'm going to be all up in your DMs when I have something coming out.
Oh,
thank you so much. And it's lovely to have you back, Tom. It's been an absolute joy to have you back in the hot seat in front of the camera.
Well, no, it's a real pleasure. And I can tell you now that, I mean, I've met people in China, Malaysia, Australia, the US, Sweden, Amsterdam, and they all have listened to your episodes. So it's like, it just blows my mind. So it's great. Mind the Gap, people, it's like a thing. So I'm pretty excited about that. And thank you so much for keeping it going.
Oh, it's been a joy. It's been a joy. But we are going to have to call it a day for now, and kind of bring this episode to a close. But we look forward to some new guests in the future. We've got a few things up our sleeve. So I'm going to say cheerio to everybody who's listening, and thank you again to John and Tom. Thank you for listening to Mind the Gap. I'm Emma Turner and I've been presenting with my co-host Jon Hutchinson. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a review, share on social media and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Find us on our YouTube channel by searching Mind the Gap with Jon and Emma, or head over to Spotify for an audio version. This podcast was produced in association with Haringey Education Partnership and our producer is Luke Kemper.